Hey, another day, another project. So we're back on the house today. As you can see, we've got our siding painted. We need to do a little bit of touch up on that, but obviously the deck's been constructed, porch is done. And actually some of the delay between these videos is that I was actually waiting for this concrete to set up. We have a small, concrete sidewalk from the driveway to this pad here where it'll be the landing for our stairs of the porch. And so in today's video, we're going to go through actually building up that step. I'm going to do a nice wide 5.5 foot wide stair set that's going to just bring a nice gradual step down from the deck and onto this landing. So stay tuned and we'll get into it. One of the very first steps for figuring out your stairs is that you need to know what kind of riser height you're going to be using, and how many steps are actually required to go from your starting point, which is the finished surface of your deck, down to the finished surface of your floor, in my case, the concrete. So what we do is we place a straight edge on the top of this top finished surface. We're going to make sure it's level. I've got a nice 6 foot level here, just making sure that the bubble's level. And all we're doing is we're measuring down from the concrete, or from the bottom edge of this level to the concrete. In my case, let's see if we get this level, I'm at 21.25 is my overall height of these stairs. Now I've already done some of the calculation in the background, but I know that I'm going to have an overall stair run of 27.75 inches, or 27.25 inches, sorry. So that what I'm measuring that off of based on my design is I'm taking that from this front face of my deck joist, and I'm measuring out from there and seeing where it's going to land on the concrete. It may be a little less critical if your concrete extended all the way underneath the deck, but I actually didn't want that. So I built mine about a foot away from this, and I want to see that the stair tread, or the stair framing, the stringers, will land on the concrete as I intend them to. I've gone through a couple different iterations of this just based on the tread depth that I wanted, based on the material I've got. And so what I'm ending up with is that 27.25, and how you can measure that. And I think it's pretty intuitive, but you'll use a straight edge, or a level, make sure that it's plumb, take a measurement off the deck. And what you're going to do is adjust this back and forth until you get it leveled and then to the right mark. And so that's where I'm at 27.25 is my line here. I already had that marked from before. I find it most useful to put the tape measure on the back side of the level, because then you can kind of pinch that in place actually as you're checking your bubble. And so that's where I've got things lined up. So we're at 21.25 overall height, and I've got a 27.25 overall run. It's a pretty short set of stairs. I don't need a whole lot of risers in the end. I'm actually going to build up only 2 steps that are going to go on here, with the first step being the top of the deck and the last step being this concrete here. All right, guys, I'm going to nerd out here for a second. With my real job, I do a lot of CAD work. I use a different set of software than this one, but for home use, I use Autodesk Fusion 360. It's a free license to use for tinkerers and hobbyists that aren't intending to make money off of it. For a lot of my home projects, this is what I'm using. What I've got is a sketch of what my outside stair stringers will be. I'm going to have 2 outside stair stringers that will be identical, obviously, and then my inside stair stringers, since I'm having 5 total stringers, are going to be cut just slightly different. And that's because I'm going to have a 2x material acting as kind of bracing at these locations. So I'm going to cut the inside stringers a little differently so that they notch around that. Some of the critical things, though, when doing a design for stairs, and check your own building code, but at least in my area, the maximum riser is 7.75 inches, and that has to be consistent within 3/8 of an inch for as many risers as you've got. So what I'm doing is, I know my overall height is 21.25 tall from the top surface of my deck down to where my concrete is. I ended up just making each of these riser heights the same, and then finding what number actually got those all to be the same. In my case, I'm going to have a riser height, including the finished deck tread material, of 7 1/8 inches. Now it's handy for me to do this all on CAD because on the bottom, I'm going to be finishing on my concrete. I don't have another tread surface that I'm going to be accounting for. Whereas my dimension in the middle here with this kind of intermediate step, I have a finished tread or a finished tread on one set of steps as well as on the next. So I want to make sure I'm accounting for that so that consistently I'm getting the same riser height. Another requirement for the code is a 10-inch minimum tread depth. In my case, I'm going to be using 7 1/4 inch wide material that's doubled up to create kind of a picture framed look in the stair tread. And so with two of those, I've got 14 and a half or 14 5/8, including the gap, 14 5/8 inch deep tread with a 1-inch overhang on the front nose of it. Another requirement is that when you're cutting out your notches, you shouldn't be left with less than 3.5 inches, kind of in this neck down region. I'm using a 2x12 for my stringers, and so it's actually 11 1/4 inches wide. Seems like wood keeps on shrinking. But with that, I'm left with about 4 1/4 inches after cutting my notch like this. So it's handy to me to draw this out in CAD. And I know if you were more experienced or better carpenter, you could do this all on paper. But for me, I like to do it on CAD so that I can punch in the numbers that I want it to be, and I'll let the drawing kind of reconfigure itself with the proper constraints so that it can show me what I need. I'm going to use this as I'm laying out my my boards, my 2x12s, and just kind of referencing it until I get a good set for my outside stringers, cut and kind of check fit, and then I'll use those stringers, those actually wood boards, then as templates that I can just trace around for my intermediate stringers on the inside of this stair structure. So what I've got here is I just cut a quick cardboard template here. This is going to have my 7 1/8 overall riser, and I've got a 13 5/8 tread depth, which allows me to have an inch overhang on the other side, accounting for, my extra material and such. What I'm doing is I've got this loosely placed here. This is the angle I need my rise over run for the first tread. The overall first riser is actually only going to be 6 3/8, and that's because I can't account for an extra set of tread surfaces. My first one's going to be down on the concrete, whereas up here I'm going to have a tread surface here and a tread surface here. So I need to make sure that my 7 1/8 overall riser height aligns with the finished height of this side. I'm using my laptop as I'm kind of going through this just to verify that I'm getting the dimensions correct as I write them down. So while cardboard's great, it never hurts to double check things. I've got 13 5/8 here, and this will be the point that I just draw a right angle down. Like that. And now my first one is the 6 3/8 that I said. So I'm going to pull down 6 3/8 at a couple points and then draw my line so that I know that it's parallel 6 3/8. I'll do another one over here. Once we get this all scribed out, we're going to come back and do some spot checks on it to make sure everything aligns with the drawing as we wanted it to. So this bottom should be just over 12 inches long, and we're just right at 12. So probably good enough. mean, we're talking about what, 10 thousandths of an inch difference from my CAD model. So I mean, CAD is perfect. It's going to give you the exact number. You're never going to get that with your woodworking. So take it with a grain of salt. So then here I've got 7. I'm going to go up 7 1/8. And that's right at the edge of the wood where I wanted it. And then we're going to come back one more for another step. You'd seen on some of one of the other videos, I had been using a 3D printed kind of template thing. You know, I was a little bit in a rush. I want to get these steps done. And not that the 3D printing takes a long time, but the overall build volume that I've got with my printer isn't large enough to get me a full template size like I would like. So I just ended up doing the cardboard. So now we're at another step here. And then again, we're going to cut this back. It's going to be 13 5/8. And then we'll just draw a line down from there. So 13. I always like to burn a couple inches so I can actually, since I don't have anything to hook on, I'm just going at 10. So I can easily figure out 13 5/8 would be 23 5/8. And that should be the end of mine. And I'll just do my right angle down from there. And this will be the surface that contacts the existing deck structure. So this is my overall stair. Make it a little easier for myself to cut. I'm just going to draw a square line here so I can cut that off and attack it from a couple different sides. I think that makes sense, though. Let's just quick do a couple checks. So I've got 6 3/8 to the bottom. Yep. It looks like it's running parallel, 6 3/8. This is going to be 7 1/8. That's where I'm at. Got 13 5/8 there. Another 13 5/8 there. Okay. So let's give that a cut and see how things fit. Before we go too crazy, just want to quick double check that we're actually getting what we want out of this. I'm getting my 6 3/8 here off the finished concrete. We're putting up 7 1/8 here, and then I'm going to have 7 1/8 here. Right now it measures about 7 3/4, but I'm putting a 3/4 inch material on top of it. So it'll be closer to 7. And that's where I say it's not going to be exact, but for the ease of cutting things, I wanted the 7 1/8 in other locations. As long as it's within 3/8 of an inch, the variance across the different steps, you should be okay. And, you know, although this isn't the correct position kind of laterally where I want this stringer to be, it does show that it lines up with that 27 1/4 inch mark. All right, so where we're at now, I've got all my stringers cut. They're all cut at the full size. I haven't cut back the 1.5 inches for this extra structure that I'm building, but I'll do that in a moment. I've picked the nicest pieces for my exteriors, my outside stringers, and what I'm going to do is I have this piece ripped at 6 3/8 wide, and it's overall 58.5 wide. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start building up kind of a box frame of my outside of the stairs so that I can hold it in place and make sure everything's level and square. Because this is a piece of treated lumber that's going to get stained similar to the rest of the deck, I didn't want to just drive these screws in wherever. I kind of like to keep them kind of consistent looking. And so I've just got 3 spaced out evenly on both ends of this. I haven't cut yet this piece that's going to go across the back. I just wanted to start with this front one though. So the goal here is to get everything kind of flush and squared up. Now I know green wood always tends to warp and twist and everything as it's drying. These aren't the wettest pieces, but they aren't bone dry either. So the best you can do is to get things squared up at the beginning and hope that they don't go too terrible. I like building this on the concrete though, because it gives me a nice flat surface to work on versus being in the grass or something, so that I know that this isn't going to rock around, and neither is this. I'll go ahead and do this to the other side, and then I'll rip my next piece to go across the back, and I can hold it up against the deck and kind of make sure that everything's aligned where I want it, and that the frame is square. Once that's done, then I can start cutting these guys to kind of infill the center, and I'm going to build this up as a structure separate from the deck before I actually install it to the deck. All right, so we've got our bottom, I'll call spanner. It's some kind of like framing down here. We got one up at the top. They're both at 58.5 on the inside of my stringers. And then I have my last one I just cut. This one is 7 1/8 tall. And this will go in between these two guys, and I'll screw them in from those sides. And what that does is that gives me the frame that I can kind of infill the rest of these stringers with. Before I've actually installed anything, I have my inside stringers marked out at 16 on center for the centers, and my outsides are actually 12.5 in between the stringers. And that's because I'm going to be doing some kind of picture framing with the deck material, and I need to infill this with a little bit more support. In the end, this is going to be a lot more just wood framing, and really the composite decking isn't a huge part of this build. When I hold this up though, you can kind of see how everything's going together. Like I said earlier, it's nice to build it on a flat surface like the concrete that we just poured, because then you can kind of build everything and it should be all square. It's my luck that where things ended up is actually just below my bolt here for the deck joists. And so what I'm going to have to do is unfortunately do a little notch probably in my top piece of composite decking just to get around there. You know, one of the reasons for doing it this way, you had seen me flip them over and install these intermediate stringers on the opposite side. But one of the reasons that I kind of like doing it this way, or thought I would, is that I don't want to have any kind of wobble in my deck or in my framing. And so by attaching them to the back, making sure everything's flush across the top, I can come back in and kind of press down on all of these and make sure everything's at the right height, that none of these intermediate joists or stringers are causing me to have a hump or anything in it. I've marked things out like before so that I don't, or so that all my screws and things are consistently spaced. And I've already got them marked out for their 16 on center, like I had mentioned previously. Now these do have a little bit of a twist in them, some of them. So I'm going to have to kind of force some of these around a little bit just to get them straight, or to get them plumb. But hopefully not too terribly. And since these are fairly short stringers, there's not going to be a lot of availability to, twist them around. I do have lines, or sorry, I don't have lines scribed on here. I'm just going to use my speed square and kind of hold them to that and make sure that they're at least, as plumb as I can get them. And I'm just going to shoot some screws through here, just like I had done with this lower bracket. Yeah, everything's coming out pretty nice. They're all plumb across the bottom. I don't feel any wobbles to it, so it's, I think, pretty well done. So since we're doing a picture frame type deck board, I need to have some supports at these ends where the right angles will happen, and you'll need to support the ends of the deck board. So what I'm doing is using some of this leftover 2x8 material that I had cut, or sorry, 2x10 material that I had cut some of these supports out of. I'm just putting this on underneath of these just to catch those tail ends of the deck boards. What I've noticed, and the same is true for the decking that we've done, very important to keep that all flush with this top edge so that you don't have one deck board being pulled down higher or lower than the other ones around it. Well guys, as you're probably getting used to by now with this channel, there's a lot of audio issues. Unfortunately, I realized after filming the last couple clips that the microphone had either burned out of batteries or disconnected or something. So just a quick overview of what we've done here. I used that CAD software I had mentioned earlier to design out these stringers with a consistent rise and a broad depth to them to give kind of a gradual step up into the porch. The inside stringers are cut with a 1.5 inch recess here, and at the tail end, so that these vertical 2x can stick on the faces of them. I built that so that it's about 61.5 inches overall width. I'll have an inch overhang on all sides for my deck so that of the treads, so that my deck and the treads have a consistent look to them. I've placed this extra blocking material on the outsides, and that's to catch the picture framed corners of the deck boards so that there's supports on all ends. And then underneath, to secure it to the deck, I've got my metal straps that are coming up underneath here and nailed into the rear of the joists. Temporarily, to kind of hold things in place, I used some of these deck screws just to make sure everything was snug before I put those brackets in place. On the bottom sides, I have butyl tape across all bottom surfaces, and that's to keep moisture from wicking up from the concrete and into the bottom of the stairs. And I've also got some of these galvanized brackets with tendies nails into the front face and then tapcons down into the concrete. And that's just to provide some additional prevention to any kind of lateral movement or anything. All in all, it's all probably overbuilt for what it needs to be, but I kind of like the idea of overbuilding and not having to worry about it than underbuilding and having to fix something in the future. The next step for us will be to put on the actual deck boards and then to stain everything to match the existing deck. So we've got this first set of deck boards on. This is the picture framing that I was describing, where I've got a mitered 45-degree angle on the corners. I ran out of my butyl tape on the last about 3/4 of an inch of these blocking pieces. I don't think it's going to matter too much though. But what we're going to do is similar to how I did the deck. I'm coming in at the corners, making sure everything's flush like this, and toenailing a screw in from this side and same on the other side. However, in order to do that, you got to pre-drill those. These screws have a tendency to kind of walk around a little bit, and so the corners take a little bit of finesse to get them to actually line up how you want without the screw pushing it away. I go in with a pretty small screw. This is a pretty small drill bit. This is only 1/8 inch right now, and then I come back with what looks like, probably about 1/4 inch or so, and that just is to give it a little bit of a countersink, so that the head of the screw doesn't kind of mushroom over too much. It's a little bit of a pain, but what I like to do is I like to pin these corners first so that I can shift the whole frame into place and get the proper overhang. Like I said, it'll kind of pull itself one way or the other, so just be cognizant of that and don't drive it in so fast that it'll overdo it. Like any kind of woodworking joint, sometimes it's better to keep it a little proud on the corner so that when the screw draws it tight, it brings it aligned. What I like to do though is before I actually drive a screw in there, clean off these surfaces, because there's a lot of buildup from these composite screws that can keep your corners from actually fully sucking tight. I've been having good luck though with, at least with these screws, with my impact driver. I know that on the hidden fasteners you don't want to use an impact driver because you'll snap the screw, but I think these are like a number 10 or maybe number 9 screw, so they're a little bit thicker screw than what the hidden fasteners use. So I suppose I'm getting ahead of myself here. Like I said, I want to do a little bit of a countersink or a counterbore to it, just so that the head of the screw can recess into the side of this without putting too much extra stress or force on the clamping action of it. Oh, and I'm down to 1 battery at the moment since the other one's on the charger, so I'm constantly flipping between them. Okay, so we got these corners pinned. And our next step is to do some of these face screws. I've got them spaced out 2 inches from the back end. And so what I'm doing is I'm double checking that I've got the 1 inch overhang that I wanted. And then kind of the way I set this up is I'll use my tape measure locked, and I'll get my square out in a drill. And I don't want this to go very deep because I don't actually want it to penetrate the wood too far. This is only to get through the composite decking. And using my speed square like a guide, I've got it 2 inches from the end, and then 1 3/4 from the side, so that it gets over the 1 3/4 into the 2x12 stringer. And I'll do the same thing on this side then. And usually what I like to do is kind of lock in a couple of the corners so that I can double check things before I just go in and screw in the field. So here's a quick example too. I've got some of these left over from the rest of the decking. If they have any of these plastic nubs on them, you got to make sure to get the plastic off of it, because otherwise it'll build up underneath the head and you'll never actually get it to come all the way home. But like that, you don't want it proud of the surface and you don't want it real deep. Just something so that it should be flush. I'm going to do the other side, like I said, just to make sure everything's kind of pulled evenly and square and everything. If you only do one at a time, 1 screw at a time, then you still have a little bit of flexibility to adjust things rather than going and doing both at a time. And now that side to side, this is all locked in place, I can go ahead and finish off these side pieces. And then when I'm doing my corners, so it's already pinned like this finished piece down here. And what I'm doing is I'm just drawing a line straight out of this, or rather using my speed square based on this intersection point, and then doing the same spacing. So it's 1 3/4 from both sides. I think with this kind of stuff, keeping things consistent and aligned always makes it look the best. And now just to finish this off, at least this front piece, all I'm doing is getting it centered on my joists, and I'll do the same spacing. I'm going to eyeball it, and I know that's a sin, but I think it's all right so long as my next board lines up the same way. So here's the last piece of the puzzle. Trying to keep this 1/8 of an inch from the ends. I use my flat blade here, my scraper, to kind of act as a spacer for this. And what I've got is it butting into this little bolt that I've got. So I know you'll never take this thing apart. So I'm gonna have to notch it around that bolt. All right, we got the notch cut out, and I'll just use my square here to line up my holes. Now I'll work this gap after I've cut everything. I think it'll look a little better than what it does at the moment. Unfortunately, this side of my framing square is a little too worn for me to actually see the numbers, so I'm just going to overlay my tape measure on here. Now for these last ones, I can't get them right aligned with these. So what I'm going to do is bring them in 1 3/4 inches so it matches this kind of spacing, and I'll bring it parallel to these, so it'll be 1 3/4 inches, 1 3/4, and so on. So we have these cut edges. I've already rounded over this one, but just using some 80 grit sandpaper, you can kind of come over and clean up this edge. When you sand it, it almost blends the edges together and hides any kind of misalignment you might have between them. Well, guys, this is the end of this project. I'm a little stiffer, the sun's a little lower in the sky, but overall I'm pretty well pleased with these stairs. As I mentioned, they're a little bit more overbuilt than probably what's necessary, but I'd rather have things overbuilt and not have to worry about them in the future. As I mentioned earlier on, the overall tread depth is a little bit deeper than originally I had anticipated. Minimum is 10 inches. I went with 14, and that just worked out well with the size material I'm using. My overall riser height is 7 inches, 7.5 inches, whereas the requirement states nothing greater than 7 3/4. And then, as I mentioned, I've got everything strapped in the back. We've got Tapcons in the front holding it, and we've got the picture frame decking on the front. My dog is getting a little older, so I think she's going to appreciate the low riser height and the deep tread depth. Already the cat's appreciating it, and I'm sure we'll spend some evenings out here sitting. Anyways, if you guys have any questions, leave them in the comments. Please give us a like or a subscribe, as is the YouTube way, and we'll catch you on the next one. Bye.